Hi, I'm Sharon Hoover, and I direct the National Center for Safe Supportive Schools, and I'll be talking with you all today about family engagement. So first, we want to recognize a partner in our work. The National Federation of Families is a national family-run organization that is focused on the issues of children and youth with emotional, behavioral, or mental health needs and substance use challenges and their families. Their emphasis on advocacy offers families a voice in the formation of national policy and services and supports for their children with mental health needs and substance use challenges across the lifespan. And Dr. Linda Gargan, their executive director, has given us the permission to share the following information regarding the definition and best practices and effective strategies for meaningfully partnering with families. So when we think about language, some use the term partnership versus engagement to describe the extent of collaboration with families. And four leading proponents of family school partnerships, and they're named here: Ann Henderson, Karen Mapp, Vivian Johnson, and Don Davies, offer us four levels of family school partnership that can be present between schools and families. And I want you to think about these in relation to your own school. So the four levels of partnership are: first, a partnership school, where all families and communities have something great to offer. We do whatever it takes to work closely to make sure every single student succeeds. Another level is the open door school. Parents can be involved at our school in many ways. We're working hard to get an even bigger turnout for activities, and when we ask the community to help, people often respond. A third level is what they call the come if we call school. Parents are welcome when we ask them, but there's only so much they can offer. The most important thing that they can do is to help their kids at home. We know where to get help in the community if we need it. And then finally, they talk about the fortress school. Parents belong at home, not at school. If students don't do well, it's because their families don't give them enough support, and we're already doing all that we can. Our school is an oasis in a troubled community, and we want to keep it that way. So just take a moment to think about your own school or your district overall and the relationships that schools have with families. How would you honestly rate your school or district, thinking about these four different levels of partnership? Dr. Gargan uses the following definition for family engagement. And as I read the definition, I ask you to just pay close attention to those words in red. Family engagement is a collaborative and strengths-based process through which professionals, families, and children build positive and goal-oriented relationships. It is a shared responsibility of families and staff at all levels that requires mutual respect for the roles and strengths each has to offer. Looking back to our words in red, family engagement requires collaborative and strengths-based process that involves shared responsibility. It is all about relationships, respect, and building on strengths that all partners, staff, and families bring to the table. Building on the definition and the concepts of collaboration and building on strengths, principles of best practice for authentic family engagement are listed here. So authentic family engagement provides opportunities for families to build their own capacities and capabilities and connections. It sees families as capable, competent partners in their children's development and learning even when they are struggling with significant adversities. And finally, needing to be embedded in family engagement strategies within and across systems and programs. Ideally, this should not really happen in silos, but be part of the whole system. We know language matters, and the term involvement and engagement really are two different things. Family engagement, many think of as a higher level of partnership than involvement. Family involvement, some describe as a one-way behavior where the family approaches the school or the school approaches the family. On the other hand, family engagement, we think of as more of a two-way interaction where families and staff come toward each other. They come together with a mutual goal of supporting student growth. And we each have a responsibility for the process of and contributing meaningfully to reaching a solution when we're talking about family engagement. As we move into what effective family engagement looks like, it's important to remember that just as with youth, engagement of families is more than just having them at the table or keeping them informed. The goal is for them to be true equal members at the table where their input and their perspectives are sought after, but also valued. So keep in mind that our goal is not to just check a box and say that we've brought families in. It's more about a commitment to helping families be heard, feel connected, and have a prominent seat at the table, and creating a system that reflects elements that are important and relevant to families. So some examples: providing guidance and foundational information prior to a meeting with a family so that they can have a meaningful role, and ensuring that written material uses clear and plain language that is free of jargon, and where applicable, provides written materials in the first languages of students and families. So I ask you to take a moment just to reflect silently on this question. How do you help families as an educator? How do you help families feel heard, connected, and have a seat at the table? It's important that we reflect on the barriers to engagement and that we differentiate these barriers from those of involvement, which might include barriers like transportation or childcare, language, scheduling conflicts. In contrast, barriers to authentic family engagement may involve things like fear or distrust or power imbalance or cultural uniqueness. Feelings of intimidation, right? So we know that teachers and school staff may be seen as the professionals, the experts, and families may feel incompetent or intimidated. They may not know the jargon. They may not know the ins and outs of the system or ways that they can contribute. And even with the best of intentions and strategies from school staff, families may still feel hesitant to engage. They may feel blamed, intimidated, outnumbered, incompetent, or many families may have past negative experiences with schools related to their children or to themselves, and that may discourage engagement. And certain families, including our BIPOC, our Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, and newcomer, our refugee and immigrant families, may experience even greater barriers. When we think about our work in cultural responsiveness and equity, it is important to note that when engaging families, there is not a one-size-fits-all approach. Cultural values and beliefs need to be acknowledged and respected when planning how to address barriers to involvement and engagement. And it really is the responsibility of schools to show cultural humility and sensitivity when we are trying to engage families effectively. Prior negative experiences of families may need to be addressed directly. Families with history with the educational system may limit their engagement if those experiences were poor. Some parents, guardians, and caregivers have had their own negative experiences with the education system, right? So consider the experience, for example, of caregivers who attended segregated schools, or those who've had unaddressed learning needs, or caregivers who were subject to exclusionary discipline practices, or who may have been otherwise victims of prejudice or discrimination in schools. As a result of those prior experiences, some families may legitimately feel unsafe or even unwelcomed in schools. In your efforts to engage and partner with families, don't hesitate to ask parents, caregivers, family members, what was your experience like when you were in school? And what can I do to help you feel more welcome at this school? Family histories with the education system may also limit their engagement. Some parents, guardians, caregivers, again, have had their own difficult experiences, and you can see some of those listed here with a reminder of the questions to ask. As previously discussed, engagement is a two-way interaction. There may be times that families are interested in engaging, but school staff may be hesitant to engage in partnerships with families. They may have had negative experiences with families. They may worry about liability. They may feel like they don't have the time to commit to family engagement, or they may not even know how to best engage families since they may not have been trained on how to do this effectively. Dr. Karen Mapp is a senior lecturer at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and her research practice focus over the past 20 years has been on the cultivation of meaningful partnerships with families, community members, and educators that support student achievement and school improvement. And in this video that I'm going to share, Dr. Mapp provides advice for educators on family and community engagement strategies.
So my 3 tips for educators would be, 1, that when you are trying to improve your practice when it comes to family engagement, that you have to really examine your core beliefs about your families. How do you see the families in the community? Do you look at them through a deficit lens that perhaps you don't see that they have strengths, or do you look at them as assets, people who have knowledge and skills that you really need to be an effective educator? The second tip, it would be that change the communication from being about negative news or bad news to positive news. And so I always say to teachers especially, make those first phone calls home, especially at the beginning of the year, about positive information, or text things about what the child is doing that's good. A lot of families tell me that the only time they hear from the school is with when it's bad news. And then I think the third piece would be to really think about making those communications about academics and not about discipline. So it sort of goes with number 2, but more specifically, when you're talking to families, let them know what their children should know and be able to do. Families really want to know that information. They don't want to just know that Johnny's been a good boy, or that Susie, is nice, because a lot of my families say that's the kind of feedback we get, where your child is nice. They want to know, what should they know and be able to do in October, and in January and June? And they want to help you get there. So I would say that those would be the 3 things, the 3 tidbits that I'd like to share with educators of how they can do something different with their families.
So as you reflect on the video, I encourage you to think about what are some examples of family skills and knowledge that would enable you to be a more effective educator with your students? What are some ideas that you have about shifting communication with families to be more positive information about students? And then finally, as we just heard about, what are some ways that you can incorporate links to learning in your communication with families? Let's consider how we can engage families. So here are some strategies. First, we can work with families from the very beginning to develop and plan how to engage them. At the very beginning, including the first meeting you have with families. So being deliberate about meaningful engagement versus participating, acknowledging the importance and expertise that diverse families bring to the table, and recognizing the unique knowledge and perspectives that families have about the school and community. Let's recall what we learned in our first sessions about cultural responsiveness and equity when we engage families. First, we want to be deliberate about demonstrating equity by engaging all families, including those who have been historically marginalized and minoritized, and amplifying their voices and leadership. It's important to remain aware of the impact of bias and power and privilege on family engagement. These strategies will help you to be aware and inclusive of cultural differences, as well as to be accountable to students, to families, and communities that you serve by creating a school environment where all students are safe and supported. And don't forget the tips on culturally informed communication that we learned about earlier on. So using a strengths-based approach to describing a child and their needs, starting conversations with what the child does well, presenting challenges as areas for growth, talking about a child's potential and offering hope and strategies available to help the child succeed. And then finally, asking for input from the child, the youth, and the caregiver on what works best for them. Some questions to consider as you engage your students and families in conversations about their own style and preferences might include, how would you describe your child's communication style? How would you describe your child's style of relating to peers and adults? How does your child typically communicate what you need, what they need from peers and adults? What may your child need in a classroom to feel safe and supported? What motivates your child to work or learn at home or at school? And what types of peer or adult supports are helpful when your child is experiencing a challenge? Cultural responsiveness work is intentionally healing and non-pathologizing, and we need, as educators, to resist the tendency to pathologize individuals and focus rather on promoting healing through fostering safety and support of all students and families, and supporting them in leveraging their culturally based strengths. We'll now consider engaging families from a care lens, with specific focus on engaging families impacted by racism or other forms of oppression that often result in their needs and their strengths being undervalued in schools and society. The focus on engaging families is important to promoting success and wellness of students, because families and youth are the experts of the student's unique set of strengths and needs. We also know that the family system is an important part of the child's microsystem or their immediate surroundings. An active youth and family partnership is critical to promoting sustainability and continuity of supports and services in schools. We're going to provide some practical and evidence-informed strategies on engaging families who are marginalized within the context of our society and its systems, including our education system. However, these strategies really are likely applicable for promoting safety and support of all students. So after we've effectively engaged families using those strategies, it's important to choose cultural responsiveness and ask youth and families directly about culture and identity. Ask questions like, what's important for me to know about your culture and background? What are important cultural beliefs and cultural beliefs and values of your family and community? And what are the strengths of your culture, your family, and your community? Your efforts to focus on cultural and community-based strengths are an important way to help all students feel included and valued, especially students from communities that are the subjects of negative stereotypes that may undermine their cultural strengths. Intentionally engaging your students and their families in these conversations communicates to them that you see their strengths, and your school or classroom is a space where their cultural strengths are both recognized but also valued. As we engage youth and families, we should also respect youth and families as the expert. In the context of strong relationships with youth and families, we gain opportunities to learn important information about our students. This information can be used to help us structure our learning environments in ways that promote wellness and success. In our interactions with youth and families, as opposed to making assumptions based on preconceived notions, it's important that we respect youth and caregivers as the experts on the student and learn from them about how we can best help the student be the best version of themselves at school. And we know that students from various backgrounds have different styles of communication. They may have different ways of relating to each other and maybe different motivations that are all impacted by their cultural background and identity. And to better understand the unique strengths and needs of your students, it's important to be intentional about asking them to share this information. Furthermore, be open to modifying your own classroom environment, instructional practices, and interpersonal style, among other factors, to attend to the diverse needs of all of your students. Take a moment to think about the different organizations and groups that play an important role for youth and families in your community. So as we think beyond just youth partnership and family partnership, part of that is also thinking about, how do we partner with the community? Which organizations and groups in your community are already connected to your district or your school, and which are not yet connected but could or should be? And finally, how are you going to use today's learning, so our discussion about youth engagement, about family engagement, to take action in your own district and school? There are a number of resources for further learning that are shared on our site, and we thank you for engaging with us in this discussion of youth and family engagement. And we encourage you to stay connected with us at the National Center for Safe Supportive Schools.